what does free speech mean to me? I think that free speech is a difficult issue to talk about and to completely define or articulate. In some ways, it's easier to say what is unacceptable within particular realms of discourse. So what I, as a teacher, wouldn't, the sorts of speech that I wouldn't allow in my classes, hate speech, for example. And in a way, it's easier to say what unacceptable speech is within very particular contexts than to make a broad pronouncement about what free speech or what speech that shouldn't be allowed is. In general, I think it really depends on the particular context. I think I would answer back with another question, which is, what exactly do you mean by censorship? Censorship by whom? Censorship of what? I think that censorship is something that's always historically situated. So, for example, in Germany, it's illegal to print political flyers or to create T-shirts that have swastikas or that have obvious Nazi insignia. And in Germany, because of their particular history, this makes a lot of sense. But I think that you can never generalize about these issues of free speech or censorship because they always come up in societies with particular histories. The question as to what good it might do, going back to the case of Germany, is also pretty unclear. So it might be that in Germany, outlawing these symbols do help people feel more protected. On the other hand, you could also say that because neo-Nazi groups don't obviously display these symbols, it's easier for them to not be recognized in public. That maybe if they were displaying these symbols, there would be more of a public outcry against right-wing politics in Germany. So I think there are two different issues, both when censorship is somehow justified, but then also when it's productive, right? When it actually accomplishes something. It hasn't affected my own work, though I think that lately there's been growing concern about censorship and issues of academic freedom and free speech within the university and for faculty teaching at the university. So there have been a couple of changes lately and some trends and developments in higher education that can make it harder for faculty members to address, bring up, teach about contentious political issues in class. One of the developments is the growth of contingent faculty, so the number of tenure-track jobs, secure employment decreasing, and the number of adjuncts, people who are hired on a short-term basis, whose contracts can be terminated at any time, growing. And this to me raises a concern about free speech, because the whole idea behind the tenure system is so that professors, once they're tenured, have the kind of freedom to address, talk about difficult political issues, something that if you might not get a teaching contract the next year, you would be much more hesitant to even broach with your classes. So this hasn't, I'm very fortunate to have the position that I have here at BU. This hasn't affected me, but I think it is something that's increasingly affecting higher education. One thing that we might think about less when we think about free speech isn't just what people are allowed to say, but who gets to talk, who has the platforms to talk on national media, whose voices get disseminated to people around the country. I think what we see in protests often are people who feel that their voices aren't being heard anywhere. So they, free speech, you can say everything that you want, but if nobody's going to listen to you and nobody's hearing your story, nobody's recognizing your right to speak, free speech doesn't actually mean a lot. And so I worry that if we focus entirely on free speech, what you're allowed to say, we forget the sorts of inequalities of who's on the news, what sort of faces we're seeing all the time. In the States, we don't have a great diversity of opinion that we're exposed to. And so protests, I think, are important for opening up these sorts of avenues, these sorts of expressions.